So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Close your eyes. The year is 3100 BC. The desert is completely silent tonight. A warm wind moves slowly across the sand. It carries the smell of river water and dry earth. The Nile stretches out before you, wide and dark and still. Stars fill the sky above you, more stars than you have ever seen. The air is warm against your skin. Your body feels heavy and safe. You are about to travel back, gently, into the oldest story ever told. The story of a civilization that rose from the desert sand. A civilization that built mountains of stone with human hands. A civilization that lasted for 3,000 years. Tonight, we walk together through that world. Slowly, quietly. There is no hurry here. History has been waiting for you, and it will wait a little longer still. Let your breathing slow now. Let your shoulders fall. The ancient world is opening before you, soft as candlelight. We begin.
Chapter 1: The Black Land and the Red Land. Time period before 3100 BC. Key figure: the people of the Nile. Major event: the birth of Egyptian civilization. What was found? A river that made life possible. The Egyptians called their land Kemet. It meant the Black Land. The black soil along the Nile was dark and rich and full of life. Beyond that narrow strip of black earth, everything was red. The Egyptians called the desert Deshret, the Red Land. Nothing grew there. Nothing lived there for long. Between these two worlds, one black and one red, a civilization was born. Imagine standing at the edge of the Nile 10,000 years ago. The river moves slowly past you, dark and quiet. Crocodiles rest on the muddy banks like ancient stones. Herons stand perfectly still in the shallow water. The air smells of mud and lotus flowers and something ancient. People have lived along this river for thousands of years before Egypt existed. They were hunters first. They followed animals across the open grasslands of North Africa. But the grasslands were slowly dying. The rains were pulling back season by season. The green land was turning to dust. And so the people followed the only thing that never dried up. They followed the Nile. The river gave them everything. It gave them water for drinking and bathing. It gave them fish and waterfowl to eat. It gave them papyrus reeds for building and writing. And every single year, without fail, the Nile flooded. The waters rose slowly each summer, spreading across the flat land. They left behind a thick layer of dark, beautiful mud. And in that mud, anything could grow. Wheat grew tall in the Egyptian soil. Barley grew heavy and golden in the summer sun. The people planted and harvested, planted and harvested. They learned the rhythm of the river like a heartbeat. They built small villages along its banks. They buried their dead carefully with food and tools for the next life. They painted animals and boats on the walls of their homes. They looked up at the stars and began to tell stories about them. These were not yet Egyptians. They were simply people living beside a river. But slowly, very slowly, something was changing. The villages were growing larger. Leaders were emerging, men and women with authority and vision. Small kingdoms were forming along the Nile's long banks. In the north, where the Nile spread out into a wide green delta before meeting the sea, one culture was growing. In the south, where the river ran fast and narrow between golden cliffs, another culture was forming. The north wore the red crown. The south wore the white crown. For generations, these two lands existed side by side, trading sometimes, fighting sometimes, each with its own gods, its own kings, its own way of seeing the world. But the river connected them always. The Nile flowed in only one direction, from south to north, from the high cliffs to the wide delta. What the south sent downstream always reached the north, and the north always looked upstream toward the source. Two lands, one river, one destiny. The black land waited quietly. The red land watched from the edges. And somewhere along the Nile, in a world still without writing or stone temples or golden thrones, the idea of Egypt was being born. Let your body settle deeper now. The river moves slowly past you. The stars above are the same stars the first Egyptians watched. You are safe here in this ancient world. We move forward now, gently, into the next chapter of this ancient world.
Chapter 2. The First Pharaoh. Narmer and the Unification. Time period, around 3100 BC. Key figure, King Narmer. Major event, the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. What was found? The Narmer Palette. We move forward now into a moment that changed everything. The year is approximately 3100 BC. A king stands at the edge of a battlefield. His name is Narmer. He wears the white crown of the south on his head. His sandals are made of fine leather. His kilt is white linen, still and clean in the morning air. Before him, the northern armies have fallen. The ground is quiet now. The battle is over. Narmer looks out across the flat delta land. The Nile glitters in the distance, wide and silver. He has done what no king before him ever managed to do. He has united the two lands. Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt are now one kingdom, one crown, one god-king, one Egypt. We know about Narmer because of a single object, a flat piece of dark green stone carved on both sides. It is called the Narmer Palette. It is one of the oldest historical documents in the world. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of the south. He raises a stone mace above a kneeling enemy. On the other side, he wears the red crown of the north. He walks in procession, inspecting the bodies of his defeated enemies. At the bottom of the palette, a great bull knocks down a city wall. The bull represents the king, strong, unstoppable, divine. This small stone object tells us everything about how Egyptians saw their king. He was not simply a ruler. He was a god walking among men.
His power came from the gods themselves. His word was law because it was divine law. His victories were not political victories. They were cosmic victories, the triumph of order over chaos. The Egyptians had a word for this divine order. They called it Ma'at. Ma'at meant truth, justice, and cosmic balance. It was represented as a goddess with a feather on her head. When a pharaoh died and faced the gods in the afterlife, his heart was weighed against Ma'at's feather. If his heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by a great beast. If his heart was light and true, he passed into eternal life. Every pharaoh who ever ruled Egypt understood this weight. Every decision, every war, every building project was done in the name of Ma'at. After Narmer, his son Aha likely continued the work of building this new unified kingdom. The capital was established at a city called Memphis. Memphis sat at the point where the Nile Valley met the wide delta. It was the perfect place for a capital. From Memphis, a king could watch over both the south and the north. The city grew quickly. Temples were built. Palaces rose from the desert sand. A new class of people emerged, priests and scribes and administrators. These were the people who kept Egypt running. They counted the grain. They measured the floodwaters. They recorded the names of the pharaohs on stone and papyrus. Writing had arrived in Egypt. Not yet the full system of hieroglyphs that would come later, but early symbols carved into stone and pressed into clay. The Egyptians needed writing because Egypt had become complex, too complex for any one person to hold in their memory. There were taxes to collect and temples to maintain. There were foreign traders arriving with cedar from Lebanon and gold from Nubia. There were harvests to record and workers to organize. Egypt was becoming something entirely new in the world. It was becoming a state, a civilization with laws and borders and institutions, a civilization that could outlast any single king. Narmer's great achievement was not simply a military victory. It was the creation of an idea. The idea that Egypt was one land, one people, one order. That idea would survive for 3,000 years, long after Narmer himself was forgotten, long after his palace crumbled into the sand. The idea of Egypt lived on. And so, the first chapter of this great civilization rested. As you rest now, the sand is warm beneath you. The Nile moves quietly in the distance. We continue.
Chapter 3. The Age of the Pyramid Builders. Time period 2686 to 2181 BC. Key figure, Pharaoh Khufu. Major event, the construction of the Great Pyramid. What was found? The largest stone structure ever built. Settle deeper now into stillness. We move forward into the Age of Giants. The year is around 2560 BC. You are standing on the west bank of the Nile, near a city called Memphis. Before you, on a flat plateau of golden limestone, something extraordinary is happening. 20,000 workers move across the desert like a slow tide. They drag massive stone blocks on wooden sledges. They pour water on the ground ahead to make the sledges slide. The sound of wooden mallets and copper chisels fills the morning air. Foremen call out instructions in deep, steady voices. And rising from the desert floor, slowly, block by block, day by day, year by year, is the largest structure human hands have ever built, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It will rise to a height of 146 meters when it is finished. It will contain more than 2 million stone blocks. Some blocks weigh as much as 80 tons. It will take approximately 20 years to complete, and it is being built for one man, Pharaoh Khufu. The second pharaoh of the fourth dynasty, the son of Sneferu, who had already built 3 pyramids of his own. Khufu came to the throne around 2589 BC. We know relatively little about him as a person. A small ivory statue, only 7 centimeters tall, is the only confirmed image of him that survives. Such a small object for such an enormous legacy. But his pyramid tells us everything about the world he commanded. It tells us about an Egypt that was organized, wealthy, and supremely confident. An Egypt that believed its pharaoh was divine. An Egypt willing to dedicate 2 decades of national effort to building one man's tomb. The workers who built the pyramids were not slaves. This is an old misunderstanding. Modern archaeology has given us a clearer picture. The workers were Egyptian citizens. Many were skilled craftsmen, engineers, and artists. They lived in a purpose-built city near the pyramid site. Archaeologists have found their bakeries and breweries. They have found their medical records showing workers received treatment for injuries. They have found graffiti left by work gangs boasting names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. These were men proud of their work, men who understood that they were building something eternal. The pyramid was not simply a tomb. It was a machine for transformation. The pharaoh's body would rest inside, preserved perfectly for eternity. His spirit, the Egyptians called it the Ka, would rise from the body and travel to the stars. The pyramid's smooth white limestone sides would catch the sunlight and glow like a small sun itself, visible from miles away across the flat desert, a beacon between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Inside the Great Pyramid, the engineering is breathtaking even today. Deep corridors lead to the burial chamber, cut precisely into the pyramid's heart. Above the burial chamber, 5 layers of massive granite blocks form a system of relieving chambers. They distribute the enormous weight of the pyramid above, protecting the burial room below. No modern engineer has found a structural flaw in this system. After 4,500 years, the pyramid still stands nearly perfect. Khufu died around 2566 BC. His body was placed in the granite sarcophagus deep inside the pyramid. The corridors were sealed with massive stone plugs. The outer casing stones were polished to a mirror shine, and the pyramid stood complete against the desert sky, white and brilliant and eternal.
Chapter 4. Gods and Temples. The world the Egyptians believed in. Time period. Throughout Egyptian history. Major figure. The god Osiris. Major event. The creation of Egyptian religion. What was discovered? A complete vision of life, death, and eternity. Before we continue through the centuries, we pause here for a moment. We sit quietly in the shade of a temple wall. The stone is cool against your back. The air smells of incense and river water. Somewhere inside the temple, priests are chanting in low, steady voices. The sound moves through the stone walls like the memory of a dream. To understand Egypt, you must understand what the Egyptians believed, because their beliefs shaped everything. Every pyramid, every temple, every painting on every tomb wall, every law and every war and every harvest celebration. All of it grew from a single root, the Egyptian vision of the universe. In the beginning, the Egyptians said, there was only water, vast, dark, infinite water in every direction. They called it Nun, the primordial ocean. From this water, the first land rose from the deep, a small mound of earth pushing up from the deep. And on that mound, the first god came into being. His name was Atum, or sometimes Ra, the sun god, the creator. He stood alone on that first island of land, surrounded by infinite darkness and water. And from himself he created the first pair of gods, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. From Shu and Tefnut came Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Nut arched her body over the earth, her fingertips touching one horizon and her toes touching the other. Her body was the sky. Stars moved across her belly each night, and from Geb and Nut came 4 children who would shape the world forever: Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. This story of these 4 is the oldest story Egypt ever told. Osiris was good and wise and beautiful. He ruled Egypt in a golden age of peace and plenty. His wife Isis was the greatest of all goddesses, mistress of magic and protection. But his brother Seth was jealous. Seth was the god of storms and chaos and the red desert. And Seth wanted what Osiris had. One night, Seth tricked Osiris. He sealed him inside a beautiful chest and threw it into the Nile. The chest floated away. Osiris was dead. But Isis would not accept this. She searched the entire world for her husband's body. She found it at last, trapped inside the trunk of a great tree in the land of Byblos. She brought the body home to Egypt, but Seth found it again. In his rage, he cut the body of Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Isis searched again. Piece by piece, she gathered her husband back together. With the help of Anubis, the god of embalming, she wrapped the body carefully. She fanned her wings over the still form of Osiris, and through her magic, she breathed life back into him long enough to conceive a child. That child was Horus, the falcon god. Osiris then descended to rule the kingdom of the dead, not in darkness and despair, as other cultures imagined death, but in a golden land called the Field of Reeds, a paradise that mirrored Egypt perfectly, with a Nile of its own, with wheat fields and date palms and cool evening breezes.
The afterlife to the Egyptians was not an unknown country, it was home, just a deeper, more perfect version of home. This story explained everything. It explained why the sun set each evening and rose again each morning. Ra traveled through the underworld each night, battling the chaos serpent Apophis. And each dawn he was reborn, just as Osiris was reborn, just as every pharaoh was reborn after death. The pharaoh in life was Horus, the living falcon god. In death, he became Osiris. This is why the temples mattered so deeply. Each temple was the home of a god. The statue inside was not merely a symbol. The god actually lived within the stone image. Priests woke the god each morning with rituals. They washed the statue, dressed it in fine linen, offered it food and incense. They sang hymns in voices that echoed off the stone walls. This daily care of the gods was not optional. If the gods were neglected, Ma'at would crumble. The Nile might fail to flood. The crops might wither. The stars might fall from the sky. Everything depended on maintaining the divine order. And so the temples stood, decade after decade, century after century. New halls were added by each new pharaoh. New statues carved from granite and quartzite. New paintings covering every wall. The smell of cedar incense never quite left the air. The chanting of priests continued through the night, and the gods rested in their stone homes, content. As you rest now, content and warm, the temple walls hold you gently. The incense is still in the air. History whispers, and you listen.
Chapter 5. The Middle Kingdom, Egypt Reborn. Time period, 2055 to 1650 BC. Key figure, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II. Major event, the reunification of Egypt after the first intermediate period. What was rediscovered? Hope and order. We move forward now, gently, into a new age. The great pyramid builders are centuries behind us. Egypt has passed through a dark and difficult time. The Old Kingdom, that age of pyramids and absolute royal power, collapsed around 2181 BC. The reasons were many: a series of weak pharaohs, a long drought that failed the Nile floods for years. Regional governors, the Egyptians called them nomarchs, grew too powerful. The central government fractured. Egypt split apart into competing regions, each with its own ruler. This period is called the First Intermediate Period. It lasted for over 100 years, and the texts from this time carry a tone of sorrow and uncertainty unlike anything in earlier Egyptian writing. One ancient text describes this chaos this way: the land turns like a potter's wheel. Noblemen are in distress. The poor man is full of joy. Everything is turned upside down. But Egypt had survived difficult times before, and from the south, from the city of Thebes, a new royal line was rising, the 11th dynasty, and its greatest king, Mentuhotep II, would reunite the two lands once again. Around 2055 BC, after years of military campaigns, Mentuhotep II completed the reunification. He ruled for more than 50 years. He rebuilt temples and restored the cult of the gods. He sent trading expeditions south to the land of Punt, bringing back myrrh and ebony and living animals. He is shown in statues with the dark blue skin of a god, seated on his throne, powerful
and eternal. The Middle Kingdom that followed was in many ways Egypt's golden age, not just militarily or economically, but culturally. Literature flourished as never before. Stories were written on papyrus and read aloud in the evenings. The tale of Sinuhe is one of the greatest. It tells of an Egyptian official who flees the country after a royal death. He lives for years among foreign peoples in Canaan and Syria. He marries a local woman and has children. He becomes a respected leader among his adopted people. But he can never forget Egypt. He dreams of the Nile. He dreams of the smell of river mud and lotus blossoms. He dreams of coming home. And eventually, old and weary, he is invited back by the pharaoh himself. He returns to Egypt. He is given a house and fine linen. Servants wash his feet. He bathes in the Nile for the first time in years, and he weeps, not from sadness, from relief, from belonging. This story, written 4,000 years ago, still moves us today, because the longing it describes is timeless, the longing for home, the longing for the place where your soul feels at rest. The Middle Kingdom also saw a new relationship between the pharaoh and the people. The old image of the pharaoh as a distant, unreachable god gave way to something slightly more human. Portrait statues from this period show pharaohs with lined faces and furrowed brows. They look tired. They look burdened. They look, in some small way, like men who carry the weight of an entire world on their shoulders. And yet, they carry it. They continue. They maintain Ma'at. They keep the stars in their courses and the Nile in its banks. The Middle Kingdom also expanded Egypt's borders. Trading expeditions reached deep into Africa and across the sea to the Levant. Nubia, to the south, was brought more firmly under Egyptian control. Fortresses were built along the southern frontier, great mud brick walls rising from the desert. Egypt was not simply defending itself, it was growing, and the cities were growing with it. Thebes, in the south, was becoming a grand city of temples and palaces. Memphis, in the north, remained the administrative heart. Between them, the Nile flowed with boats carrying grain and stone and timber and gold. Egypt was never more prosperous. And yet, even prosperity carries within it the seeds of change. Change was coming. From the north, from across the desert, from a direction Egypt had never feared before. And so the Middle Kingdom rested, content and golden. The river moved slowly past. The temples stood quiet in the evening light. Your breathing slows with them. We continue, gently.
Chapter 6. The Hyksos, Strangers from the North. Time period, 1650 to 1550 BC. Key figure, the Hyksos kings. Major event, foreign rulers take the Egyptian throne. What was learned? That Egypt was not invincible. The night is darker now. A cooler wind moves in from the north. We are entering a chapter that the Egyptians themselves found deeply difficult to accept. Around 1650 BC, Egypt was no longer entirely Egyptian. For the first time in its history, foreign rulers sat on the throne of the pharaohs. They were called the Hyksos. The name comes from an Egyptian phrase meaning rulers of foreign lands. They came from the area of Canaan and Syria to the northeast. They had been entering Egypt gradually for generations, first as traders, then as settlers,
then as a community with its own leaders and customs, and finally as rulers. The Hyksos did not conquer Egypt with a massive army in a single dramatic battle. They moved in slowly, quietly, like sand carried on the wind. By the time Egypt realized what had happened, the Hyksos already controlled the delta in the north. Their capital was a city called Avaris. From Avaris they ruled as pharaohs, adopting Egyptian titles and customs. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own. They used hieroglyphs to write their decrees. In many ways they tried to become Egyptian, but Egypt never quite accepted them. The Egyptian rulers who remained in the south, still based at Thebes, watched and waited and grew stronger. The Hyksos brought new things to Egypt, things that would change the country forever. They brought the horse-drawn chariot. Egypt had never seen horses before. The sight of these powerful animals pulling light wooden vehicles across the desert at speed was astonishing. The Hyksos also brought the composite bow, a weapon made of multiple materials that could shoot arrows farther and with more force than the simple Egyptian bow. They brought bronze weapons and new pottery techniques. And in an irony that history loves, these foreign rulers, who Egypt so resented, ended up making Egypt militarily stronger. Because Egypt learned. The Theban rulers watched the Hyksos chariots and copied them. They learned to breed horses and train chariot drivers. They adopted the new weapons and improved on them. And then, around 1555 BC, a Theban pharaoh named Seqenen-Re-Tau went to war. His mummified body was found in the 19th century. The wounds on his skull tell a violent story. Multiple axe blows to the head. He died in battle or was executed after capture. But the war he started did not stop with him. His sons continued the fight, and his grandson, Ahmose I, finally drove the Hyksos out of Egypt around 1550 BC. The Hyksos retreated to Canaan. Egypt was Egyptian again. Ahmose I is considered the founder of the New Kingdom, the greatest era in Egyptian history. He chased the Hyksos far into Canaan to prevent them from returning. He reunified the country with an iron hand. He reorganized the army around the chariot units Egypt had learned from its former occupiers. And he turned Egypt from a peaceful agricultural society into a military power, a power that would soon extend its reach farther than any pharaoh before had imagined. The humiliation of the Hyksos period was over, but its lessons remained. Egypt was not an island. The world beyond its borders was not simply desert and chaos. Other peoples existed, other powers were rising, and Egypt would need to engage with that world aggressively, confidently, on its own terms.
Chapter 7. The New Kingdom. Egypt at its height of its power. Time period 1550 to 1070 BC. Key figure: Pharaoh Thutmose III. Major event: Egypt becomes an empire. What was built? An empire stretching from Sudan to Syria. We arrive now at the peak, the highest point, the age when Egypt was, without question, the greatest power on earth, the New Kingdom. It began with Ahmose I and stretched forward for nearly 5 centuries. 5 centuries of warrior pharaohs and immense wealth. 5 centuries of temples rising from the desert like stone forests. 5 centuries of gold flowing into Egypt from every direction. The city of Thebes became the center of the world. Its temples were the largest buildings ever constructed. The Temple of Karnak grew over centuries into a complex covering more than 100 hectares. Walking through its columns today feels like walking through a stone forest. Each column is taller than a 6-story building. The tops of the columns were painted with gold that caught the morning sunlight. The ceilings above were painted deep blue and scattered with golden stars. Walking inside was like walking under the night sky. The smell of incense was thick and sweet. The sound of chanting echoed off every surface. It was the most powerful religious building in the ancient world, and it grew larger with each new pharaoh who wanted to leave their mark. The new kingdom produced some of Egypt's most famous rulers. Thutmose I pushed Egypt's borders south deep into Nubia. He also led campaigns north into Syria, reaching the great river Euphrates. Standing at the Euphrates, he carved a stone monument celebrating his victory. He called the river the Inverted Water because it flowed in the opposite direction from the Nile. His grandson, Thutmose III, would become one of the greatest military commanders in history. He fought 17 campaigns in 20 years. His most celebrated battle was at a place called Megiddo in Canaan, around 1457 BC. A coalition of Canaanite cities had rebelled against Egyptian authority. They gathered their forces at the fortified city of Megiddo. Thutmose III marched north with his army. His generals advised him to take the safer, longer route around the mountains. Thutmose III chose the narrow mountain pass instead, the direct route, the dangerous route. He led his army through the narrow defile himself at the head of the column. The Canaanite forces were completely surprised. They had not expected the Egyptians to come through the pass. The Egyptian army poured out onto the plain before Megiddo and swept the enemy forces aside. The city fell after a long siege. Thutmose III returned to Egypt with enormous quantities of tribute, gold and silver and copper, horses and chariots, cattle and slaves, living trees in pots to be planted in the gardens of Karnak. He was celebrated as the greatest of all pharaohs, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, as one modern historian called him. But the new kingdom was not only about war, it was about wealth, and perhaps no period in Egyptian history was wealthier than the reign of Amenhotep III. He ruled for almost 40 years, from around 1388 to 1351 BC. During his reign, Egypt was so rich and so at peace that the pharaoh had time simply to build. He built on a scale that staggers the imagination. His mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes was so enormous that only its entrance statues survive today. 2 colossal figures of the king, each 18 meters tall, sitting in calm eternity. They are called the Colossi of Memnon. They have sat in their field for 3,000 years. They were already ancient ruins when Julius Caesar visited Egypt. Amenhotep III also built a palace complex of staggering luxury. Archaeologists have found painted floor tiles showing pools full of lotus flowers and swimming fish, painted ceiling tiles flying birds. The whole palace was designed to feel like the edge of a lake, cool and green and abundant. Even his artificial lake, dug for his queen Ti to sail upon, was 2 kilometers long. This was a pharaoh who wanted to live inside beauty,
who believed that Egypt's greatness should be reflected in every surface, every stone and every painted wall. This was Egypt at its most magnificent, warm and golden and immense, like the sun itself, resting at the height of the sky. Your eyes grow heavy now. The golden columns of Karnak rise around you. The incense drifts through the warm air. Egypt rests at its greatest height, and so do you.
Chapter 8. Hatshepsut, the woman who became Pharaoh. Time period 1473 to 1458 BC. Key figure, Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Major event, a woman rules Egypt as Pharaoh for 20 years. What was erased? Her name, and then found again. We pause here now, in the warm light of a temple corridor. There is a story within this golden age that deserves its own quiet chapter. The story of a woman who refused the role history had given her, and who, in refusing it, became one of the greatest pharaohs Egypt ever had. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was born around 1507 BC, the daughter of Thutmose I. She married her half-brother, Thutmose II, and became his great royal wife. When Thutmose II died young, around 1479 BC, the heir to the throne was a small boy, Thutmose III, son of Thutmose II by a secondary wife. Hatshepsut became regent, the woman who rules in the boy's name until he is old enough to govern. This was an accepted role. Egypt had seen female regents before, but Hatshepsut had no intention of simply waiting. Within a few years, she had declared herself Pharaoh. Not regent, not queen, Pharaoh. She wore the double crown. She wore the false beard of kingship strapped to her chin. She had herself depicted in statues as a male king, broad-shouldered and powerful. But she also had herself depicted as a woman, wearing a woman's dress. She moved between these identities with complete confidence, because what mattered was not her body. What mattered was Ma'at. What mattered was Egypt. And for approximately 20 years, she ruled it brilliantly. Her greatest achievement was a trading expedition to the land of Punt. Punt was a mysterious, semi-legendary place to the southeast, likely in the area of modern Somalia or Eritrea. Egypt had not traded with Punt for generations. Hatshepsut sent 5 large ships south along the Red Sea coast. The expedition returned with living myrrh trees in pots, with ebony and gold and ivory, with animals never seen before in Egypt, with incense that filled the temples with its thick, sacred smoke. The entire expedition was recorded on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. That temple still stands, and it is considered one of the most beautiful buildings in the ancient world. It rises in 3 terraced levels from the desert floor, its columns perfectly proportioned against the golden cliffs behind it. It is elegant in a way that feels almost modern. Clean lines and open space, light and shadow playing across white limestone. Hatshepsut ruled peacefully and built magnificently. She added to Karnak on a scale that rivaled any pharaoh. She erected the tallest obelisks Egypt had yet seen. She sent expeditions to mines in Sinai for turquoise. She kept Egypt prosperous and at peace.
and then she died around 1458 BC. After her death, something strange happened. Sometime later, her images were defaced. Her name was chiseled away from temple walls. Her statues were buried in pits. For centuries, historians did not know she had existed. The erasure was so thorough that her name was lost. We do not know with certainty why this happened. The most likely explanation involves her successor, Thutmose III. He may have wanted to erase evidence of a female pharaoh, to ensure that the line of royal succession appeared unbroken and male. But the erasure failed. Her buried statues survived. Her inscriptions, hidden behind new walls built over them, survived. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, Egyptologists pieced her story back together. Hatshepsut was rediscovered. Her name was spoken again after 3,000 years of silence. The woman who refused to be forgotten was finally remembered. Her temple still stands in the Golden Cliffs. The myrrh trees from Punt grow again, in a sense, in the stories we tell about her. She rests now in the warmth of history's long memory. As you rest now, safe and known and remembered. We move forward gently.
Chapter 9. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who changed the gods. Time period 1351 to 1334 BC. Key figure, Pharaoh Akhenaten. Major event, Egypt's only experiment with monotheism. What was lost? 17 years of religious revolution. The air changes here. Something new is in it. Something that feels different from everything that came before. We have arrived at the strangest chapter in Egyptian history. The reign of Akhenaten. He began as Amenhotep IV, son of the magnificent Amenhotep III. He came to the throne around 1351 BC, and within a few years he had done something no Egyptian pharaoh had ever done, something so radical that Egypt would spend generations trying to erase it. He abolished the old gods, all of them. Osiris and Isis, Amun and Ra, Horus and Hathor, and the hundreds of other gods who had filled Egyptian temples for 2,000 years. He replaced them all with one single deity, the Aten, the physical disk of the sun. He said the Aten was the only true god, and that he, Akhenaten, was the sole representative on earth. The only way to reach the Aten was through the pharaoh himself. He changed his own name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of the Aten. He closed the temples of the old gods. He sent workers to chisel the name of Amun from every monument in Egypt. He built an entirely new capital city in the desert, a city he called Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. Today, we call it Amarna. It arose from the barren cliffs on the east bank of the Nile, between Thebes and Memphis. An entirely new city built in just a few years. Palaces and temples and administrative buildings spreading across the desert floor. Akhenaten and his beautiful queen Nefertiti moved there with their court. And Egyptian art changed overnight. The stiff, formal portraits of earlier pharaohs gave way to something astonishing.
paintings and carvings showing the royal family in intimate human moments. Akhenaten and Nefertiti kissing their daughters, playing with their children in the sunlight, eating fruit together in the palace garden. It was unlike anything Egypt had produced before. The Aten was shown as a sun disk with rays ending in human hands. Those hands reached down towards the royal family, offering them life. But outside the royal court, Egypt was deeply disturbed. The priests of Amun had been among the most powerful men in Egypt. They controlled vast temple estates and enormous wealth. Akhenaten had stripped them of everything. The common people had lost access to the gods they had prayed to all their lives. The elaborate festivals and rituals that had structured Egyptian life were gone. And Egypt's foreign empire was being neglected. Letters found at Amarna showed desperate pleas from Egyptian allies in Canaan and Syria. They were being attacked by enemies. They needed Egyptian soldiers. Akhenaten seemed barely to respond. He was absorbed in his new religion, his new city, his new art. The empire his grandfather had built was beginning to fray at the edges. Akhenaten died around 1334 BC. We do not know how he died. After him came a brief, shadowy period of confusion, and then a small boy of perhaps 9 years old took the throne. His name at first was Tutankhamun, beloved of the Aten. But very quickly the name was changed to Tutankhamun, beloved of Amun. The old gods were coming back. The city of Amarna was abandoned. Within a generation it would be a ruin. The name of Akhenaten was chiseled from every wall. His city was torn down for building materials. He was referred to only as the criminal of Amarna. Egypt tried very hard to forget him. But history has a long memory, and Akhenaten, like Hatshepsut before him, refused to stay forgotten. He remains one of the most debated and discussed figures in all of Egyptian history. Was he a visionary? A madman? A political genius who tried to break the power of the priesthood? A true believer in a single God? We do not know. He left no philosophical writings explaining his beliefs. Only hymns to the Aten, beautiful and strange, that read like prayers to the warmth of sunlight. You rise beautiful on the horizon of heaven, living Aten. You fill every land with your beauty. You are remote, yet your rays are upon the earth. The desert grows quiet after his passing. The stars return to their old names. The priests light the incense again in the temples of Amun. And Egypt exhales, a long, slow breath of relief. As you exhale now, letting go, letting the ancient air move through you and away. We continue.
Chapter 10. Tutankhamun, the Boy King. Time period 1332 to 1323 BC. Key figure, Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Major event, the restoration of traditional religion. What was found? The most intact royal tomb in history. We rest here for a moment in the golden warmth, because this chapter, though short, carries a particular kind of gentle light.
the boy king, Tutankhamun. He came to the throne at approximately 9 years old. He died at approximately 18. He ruled for only 9 or 10 years. In the vast sweep of Egyptian history, his reign was a brief flicker, and yet his name is the most recognized of all the pharaohs, because of what was found beneath the Valley of the Kings in November 1922. But we will come to that. First, let us see him as he was, a child suddenly placed at the center of the most powerful kingdom on earth. Around him, powerful advisors made the real decisions. His vizier, Ai, an elderly man who had served through the Amarna period. His general, Horemheb, a tough and practical soldier who cared deeply about Egypt's military strength. These men guided the young king, or perhaps controlled him. We cannot fully know. What we do know is that under Tutankhamun, Egypt turned firmly back toward the old ways. The temples of the old gods were reopened. The statues were restored. The priests returned to their duties. Tutankhamun moved the royal court back to Memphis and Thebes. He began restoration work on temples that Akhenaten had neglected or damaged. He issued a decree describing the sad state Egypt had fallen into during the Amarna period. The temples were desolate, he wrote. The gods had turned away from Egypt. Now they were being welcomed back. Tutankhamun also conducted military campaigns in Nubia and Syria. Whether he led them personally is uncertain. He was, after all, still very young, and he was not entirely healthy. Analysis of his mummy has revealed a young man with multiple health problems, a clubfoot, signs of several different diseases, including malaria, bone damage that suggests he may have broken his leg shortly before his death. He likely needed a cane to walk. His tomb contained over 100 walking sticks and canes. He died young. The cause remains debated. Perhaps the broken leg, leading to infection. Perhaps malaria. Perhaps a combination of conditions his young body could not overcome. He was buried in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, small for a pharaoh, perhaps because his death was unexpected and a larger tomb was not yet ready. The tomb was packed with objects, more than 5,000 individual items, golden shrines and alabaster canopic jars and model boats, trumpets and board games and a child's chair, linen underwear and sandals, a lock of his grandmother's hair in a small coffin. His mummified body rested inside 3 nested coffins. The innermost coffin was solid gold. His face was covered by a golden mask so beautiful that it has become the most recognized object from the ancient world. Over the young king's face, the mask gazes with calm, eternal eyes, strong and peaceful and ageless. When Howard Carter opened that tomb in 1922, he found all of it exactly as it had been placed, 3,245 years before. The flowers placed on the golden shrine had dried and crumbled, but the seeds of the flowers were still there. If you planted them, scientists later discovered, they would still grow. 3,000 years of sleep, and still full of life. Like you now, still and quiet and full of life. The golden mask looks out with calm eyes. The ancient flowers rest in the darkness. And so do you.
Chapter 11. Ramesses the Great, the Last Giant. Time period, 1279 to 1213 BC. Key figure, Pharaoh Ramesses II. Major event: the Battle of Kadesh and the world's first peace treaty. What was built? Abu Simbel and countless temples. We move forward now, into the reign of the pharaoh who Egypt remembers above all others, Ramesses II, called Ramesses the Great. He ruled for 66 years, from approximately 1279 to 1213 BC. He outlived most of his children. He was in his 90s when he died. He had more than 100 children. He built more temples and monuments than any other pharaoh. He put his name on more statues than anyone before or after. Some of those statues were not originally his. He had the names of earlier pharaohs removed and his own name carved in their place. He was, in the gentlest possible description, a man who loved his own greatness, but he also earned much of it. Early in his reign, around 1274 BC, Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III marched north to confront the Hittites. The Hittites were a powerful empire based in what is now Turkey. They had been pushing into territories that Egypt considered its own. The two great powers of the ancient world met at a city called Kadesh in what is now Syria. The Battle of Kadesh was the largest chariot battle in history. Perhaps 5,000 chariots on each side. The clash of metal and the thunder of hooves filled the air for miles. Ramesses found himself personally surrounded at one point, his chariot moving through enemy forces alone. Whether through divine protection or exceptional chariot driving, he survived. He rallied his troops. The battle ended without a clear victor. Both sides had suffered. Both sides returned home. But Ramesses declared it an enormous Egyptian victory. He had the battle recorded on every major temple wall in Egypt. He described himself charging alone into the enemy, unstoppable as a god. The Hittite records, which also survive, tell a rather more complicated story. The truth was somewhere in between, a hard-fought battle with no decisive outcome. What followed the Battle of Kadesh, however, was genuinely historic. 16 years after the battle, around 1259 BC, Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III signed a peace treaty. It is the oldest surviving peace treaty in world history. A copy in cuneiform was found in the Hittite capital. A copy in hieroglyphs was carved on the walls of Karnak. The two great powers agreed to end their conflict, to help each other if either was attacked, to return each other's refugees. It was a document of staggering sophistication, written 3,200 years ago. But Ramesses is remembered not just for his battles. He is remembered for Abu Simbel. Deep in Nubia, far south of Aswan, in a remote cliff above the Nile, Ramesses ordered 2 temples to be carved directly into the living rock. The Great Temple has 4 enormous statues of Ramesses himself seated at its entrance. Each statue is 20 meters tall. The interior goes deep into the cliff, and it was designed so that twice a year, on specific dates, the rising sun would shine directly down the long corridor, all the way to the innermost sanctuary, illuminating the statues of the gods inside for exactly 20 minutes. Then the shadow would return. This precision, achieved without computers or modern instruments, still works today.
When the temples were moved in the 1960s to save them from the rising waters of Lake Nasser, engineers carefully preserved this solar alignment. Ramesses the Great died around 1213 BC. His mummy, when examined by modern scientists, showed a man who had suffered from severe arthritis in his later years. His spine was fused in a bent position. He likely walked hunched forward in his old age. But his hair, still visible on the mummy, was red, dyed red with henna in his old age. Vanity, even at 90, even in death. He rests now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, still recognizable, still somehow present after 3,000 years. The desert wind moves slowly around Abu Simbel. The great statues gaze out over the water, eternal and patient, as you rest now, patient and still.
Chapter 12. The Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs slept. Time period 1550 to 1070 BC. Key figure, the royal tomb builders. Major event, 63 royal tombs cut into the desert hills. What was hidden? The wealth of an empire. We walk now into a narrow valley. The cliffs rise on either side, golden and silent. The sun has passed behind the western mountains. The air cools quickly in the shadow. This is the Valley of the Kings, on the west bank of the Nile, directly across from Thebes. The Egyptians believed that the west, where the sun set each evening, was the realm of the dead, and so they buried their kings here, in the desert hills, across the river from the living city. For nearly 500 years, the New Kingdom pharaohs cut their tombs deep into the limestone bedrock of these cliffs. 63 tombs have been found so far. Archaeologists believe there may be more still hidden. Each tomb began with a steeply descending corridor, sometimes cutting straight into the cliff face, sometimes turning and descending in steps. The walls were plastered smooth and painted with scenes from the books of the afterlife, the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, the Amduat, which described the journey of the sun god through the 12 hours of night. These painted walls were a manual for the afterlife, a guide to help the pharaoh navigate the dangers of the underworld, to speak the correct words at each gate, to recognize the gods waiting in each chamber. The colors in these tombs, sealed for 3,000 years, are still vivid. Deep blue and rich red and bright yellow and white. The figures move across the walls in the eternal Egyptian profile. Faces in side view, shoulders facing forward, feet in side view. Every body shown in its most characteristic angle, so that even a painted figure would be complete and functional in the afterlife. The workers who built these tombs lived in a village called Deir el-Medina, a small, close community on the desert ridge between the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. These were not ordinary workers. They were specialists, trained artists and sculptors and plasterers, fathers who passed their skills to sons, families who had served the royal tombs for generations. They worked in shifts, 10 days on and then time at home. They were paid in grain and oil and fish. Sometimes they went on strike when payments were late. The world's earliest recorded labor strike happened here, around 1170 BC. The workers simply stopped working and gathered outside the royal mortuary temples, demanding their rations. Eventually, the payments arrived and work resumed. These workers left behind an extraordinary record of their own lives. Papyri found at Deir el-Medina include work records and legal documents, but also love poems and medical remedies and jokes. One papyrus contains a list of reasons why workers were absent from the job: making offerings to the god, sick, brewing beer, bitten by a scorpion. 3,000 years ago, and still entirely recognizable. The tombs they built are unlike anything else in the ancient world. Painted corridors descending into darkness, the smell of old stone and ancient air, the silence of centuries pressing down. When Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb, the seal on the door was still intact. The footprints of the workmen who had sealed the tomb were still visible in the floor, as if they had just stepped out, as if time itself had paused in this narrow valley. And in a sense, it had. The valley holds its silence tonight. The painted kings sleep in their stone chambers. The stars appear, one by one, above the dark cliffs. The same stars that the tomb painters placed on those deep blue ceilings. You are resting now, deeply resting, like the desert itself at night, still and ancient and at peace.
Chapter 13. The Sea Peoples and the Bronze Age Collapse. Time period: around 1200 BCE. Key figure: Pharaoh Ramesses III. Major event: a massive wave of migrations threatens to destroy Egypt. What was saved? Egypt itself, barely. Something is happening. You may sense it here in the stillness. A distant trembling, a change in the air. Around 1200 BCE, the ancient world fell apart. Not just Egypt. Every major civilization around the eastern Mediterranean collapsed or was severely damaged within the space of a generation. The Hittite Empire, which had fought Egypt to a standstill at Kadesh, simply vanished. The great city of Mycenae in Greece was abandoned. The palace civilizations of Crete went silent. Trading networks that had connected the Mediterranean world for centuries fell apart. Cities across Canaan and Syria were burned and abandoned. It is one of the greatest mysteries in ancient history. What caused the Bronze Age collapse? No single explanation has satisfied all historians. Climate change and prolonged drought, earthquakes that damaged multiple cities, internal rebellions, disruptions in the grain and copper trade that made the Bronze Age economies collapse, and the movement of great groups of people pushed from their homelands by these pressures, crashing like waves through the settled civilizations of the ancient world. The Egyptians called these people the Sea Peoples. We do not know exactly who they were. They came from somewhere in the Aegean or Anatolia. Some may have been refugees from the collapsed Mycenaean civilization. They moved in great mixed groups, fighting their way south and east. They destroyed everything in their path. Hatti fell to them. Ugarit, the great trading city on the Syrian coast, burned and never rebuilt. They entered Canaan, and then they turned toward Egypt. Ramesses III Pharaoh of the 20th dynasty, met them on land and sea. The naval battle, recorded on the walls of his temple at Medinet Habu, shows Egyptian archers standing on the shore, raining arrows onto the attackers' boats. Egyptian ships catching the enemy vessels in nets. The chaos of men falling into dark water. Ramesses III claimed a complete victory. He had saved Egypt, and he had, in a very real sense. Egypt survived the Bronze Age collapse better than almost any other civilization. It was damaged, it was weakened, it would never quite recover its new kingdom glory, but it endured. The Nile still flooded, the crops still grew, the temples still stood. Egypt endured. It always endured. But the world had changed permanently. The Bronze Age was over. A new, more fragmented world was coming, and Egypt, for the first time, felt old. Not weak, not finished, simply old. Like a great tree that has survived a storm, the roots still deep and strong, but the highest branches thinned. The storm passes now. The Nile reflects the stars. The temples of Ramesses III stand solid and quiet. Egypt breathes, and so do you.
Chapter 14. The Long Twilight. Egypt's Later Centuries. Time period 1070 to 332 BC. Key figures, various pharaohs and foreign rulers. Major event, Egypt divided, conquered, and yet persistent. What endured? The idea of Egypt itself. We enter now the long twilight. Not the end, not yet, but the slow fading of the light that had burned so brightly for so long. After Ramesses III, Egypt never quite found its footing again. The 20th dynasty produced a string of pharaohs all named Ramesses. The 9th, 10th, and 11th Ramesses ruled a country growing weaker by the decade. The priests of Amun at Thebes had grown so powerful that by the end of the New Kingdom they effectively ruled Upper Egypt themselves. The pharaoh ruled in the north. The high priest ruled in the south. Egypt was dividing again. This period, called the Third Intermediate Period, lasted from around 1070 to 664 BC. Foreign dynasties ruled parts of Egypt. Libyan chiefs from the western desert established themselves as pharaohs. Nubian kings from the south, the 25th dynasty, conquered Egypt and ruled it as pharaohs for nearly 100 years. These Nubian pharaohs were enthusiastic supporters of Egyptian tradition. They restored old temples. They revived ancient religious texts. They built in the old manner. It was as if Egypt knew it was aging and chose to dress itself in its finest old clothes. The Saite period produced real achievements. Trade flourished with Greece and Phoenicia. Greek mercenaries served in the Egyptian army. Greek merchants settled in the delta city of Naucratis. Ideas moved back and forth between Egypt and the Greek world. The Greeks were fascinated by Egypt. They came as tourists and scholars. They visited the pyramids and the temples. They asked questions about the gods and the afterlife. The philosopher Plato described Egyptian wisdom as immeasurably ancient and deep. But the pressures from the east were building again. In 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses invaded Egypt. He defeated the Egyptian army and became the new pharaoh. Egypt was now part of the Persian Empire. It would regain its independence briefly, but the Persians would return. and after the Persians came someone entirely new. Someone from the cold lands of Macedonia, far to the northwest. Someone whose name Egypt did not yet know, but whose arrival would change everything. The twilight deepens. The stars are very bright. The Nile moves quietly in the darkness below. Egypt has been so many things over these long centuries, young and powerful and golden, wounded and recovering, old and remembering, but always Egypt, always the black land and the red land, always the river and the sky. Your breathing is very slow and gentle now. The ancient world rests around you. We move forward into the final glow.
Chapter 15. Alexander and the Greeks. A New Egypt. Time period 332 to 30 BC. Key figures: Alexander the Great and Cleopatra the Seventh. Major event: Greek rulers take the Egyptian throne. What was created? A fusion of two great civilizations. The year is 332 BC. A young man rides into Egypt on a white horse. He is 24 years old. He has already conquered most of the known world. His name is Alexander. The Macedonian Greek king who had swept out of northern Greece and conquered Persia and everything between. He comes to Egypt not as a conqueror, but almost as a liberator. The Egyptians had hated their Persian rulers. The Persians had shown disrespect to the Egyptian gods. They had taxed heavily and governed harshly. When Alexander arrived, the Egyptians did not resist. They opened the gates of Memphis. They welcomed the young king. And Alexander did something very deliberate. He went to the temples. He made offerings to the Egyptian gods. He was crowned pharaoh in the ancient Egyptian manner. He visited the great oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, deep in the western desert. A long, difficult journey across the sand. What the oracle told him there he kept to himself, but he emerged from the oracle's presence with a new identity. He was, the oracle had confirmed, the son of Amun, a god. In Egypt, this was not merely a spiritual claim, it was a political fact. The pharaoh was the son of the gods. Alexander understood this. He used it. He also founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast. He named it after himself, Alexandria. It would grow to become one of the greatest cities the ancient world ever produced. Its famous library would hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the collected knowledge of the ancient world. Its lighthouse, the Pharaohs, would be counted among the 7 wonders of the world, visible for miles out to sea, a beacon for sailors, a symbol of human ambition and intelligence. But Alexander did not stay in Egypt. He continued east to Persia and Babylon and as far as India. He left governors behind. When he died in Babylon in 323 BC, at only 32 years old, his empire fragmented. Egypt fell to one of his generals, a Macedonian named Ptolemy. Ptolemy I founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. He and his descendants would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years. The Ptolemies were Greek in language and culture, but they understood what the Egyptians needed. They presented themselves as pharaohs. They built temples in the Egyptian style. They worshipped the Egyptian gods alongside their own. The temples of Edfu and Dendera, 2 of the best preserved ancient temples in Egypt today, were built by the Ptolemies.
Walking through them feels like walking through ancient Egypt, because that was precisely the intention. The Ptolemies created a remarkable fusion: Greek philosophy and Egyptian religion, Greek science and Egyptian mathematics, the two greatest intellectual traditions of the ancient world meeting in one place. Alexandria became the center of this fusion. Its museum, really a research institution, attracted the greatest minds of the age. Euclid worked out the foundations of geometry there. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy using shadows and geometry. The physician Hierolophus performed systematic anatomical studies. For a brief, brilliant moment, the light of human knowledge burned very brightly in that city by the sea. And the last of the Ptolemies was a woman, the last true pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII. She was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages, the only Ptolemaic ruler who bothered to learn Egyptian. She was a skilled politician and diplomat. She allied herself with the 2 most powerful men in Rome, first Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony. She fought to keep Egypt independent in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. She failed. In 30 BC, after the defeat of Mark Antony's forces, Cleopatra died. She was 39 years old. The ancient accounts say she died by her own hand, the asp, the sacred cobra of Egypt, a royal death, a queen's choice. With her death, 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization came to a close. Egypt became a Roman province, a very important province, the breadbasket of the empire, but a province nonetheless, no longer a world unto itself. The lighthouse of Alexandria still burned in the harbor, but the light it cast now illuminated a Roman world. Cleopatra rests now somewhere beneath the Egyptian sand. Her tomb has never been found. She keeps her secrets still. The Mediterranean wind moves softly across the water. The stars above Alexandria are very bright and so very old. Your eyes are heavy now, very heavy. Let them close.
Chapter 16. What the Sand Preserved. Egypt's Eternal Legacy. Time period, 30 BC to the present. Key figure, the civilization itself. Major event, Egypt's rediscovery by the modern world. What survived? Everything that mattered. We arrive now at the final chapter. The longest journey in human history is drawing gently to its close. 3,000 years of civilization, hundreds of pharaohs, millions of ordinary people who planted wheat and baked bread and told stories to their children by lamplight. All of it buried, eventually, under the sand, under the mud of the Nile, under centuries of Roman rule and Christian churches and Islamic mosques. Egypt was never destroyed. It was layered over. The old absorbed into the new, the hieroglyphs forgotten, the names of the gods changed but not entirely lost. Isis became the Virgin Mary in the imagination of Egyptian Christians. Her image, holding the child Horus on her lap, became the template for countless paintings of the Madonna and Child. The sacred land of the pharaohs became the land where the Holy Family fled from Herod. Egypt absorbed everything and gave everything something of itself. The Rosetta Stone was found in 1799 by soldiers in Napoleon's army. a piece of dark granodiorite bearing the same decree in 3 scripts, hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek, a key to a forgotten language. Jean-François Champollion spent 20 years working on the decipherment. In 1822, he finally cracked the code of the hieroglyphs. Egypt could speak again. 3,000 years of silence ended. The names of the pharaohs could be read. The prayers carved on tomb walls could be heard. The love poems written on papyrus could be understood. Howard Carter found Tutankhamun in 1922. The world went Egypt mad. Department stores sold Egyptian furniture. Fashion copied Egyptian jewelry. Movies were made about Egyptian curses. The ancient world had reached through time and touched the modern one because it had something to say, something that still matters. The Egyptian belief in the afterlife tells us something about what human beings need. We need to believe that the people we love do not simply vanish. We need to believe that life has weight and meaning and continuation. We need the stories. We need the beauty. We need the idea that what we build and love and create outlasts us. The pyramids have outlasted empires. The painted faces on tomb walls are still looking out at us, direct and alive. The love poems are still tender. The prayers are still moving. The jokes are still funny. After 4,000 years. This is what Egypt preserved in its dry, careful sand. Not just gold and alabaster and blue faience, but the human heart, unchanged, recognizable, still reaching toward the stars.
We are resting now. The ancient world rests around you. You have traveled a great distance tonight, from the first villages along the Nile to the last queen of the pharaohs, from the first stones of the pyramids to the painted faces in the Valley of the Kings. Your body is heavy and warm. Your breathing is slow and deep and even. The sand is warm beneath you. The Nile moves quietly somewhere in the distance. The sound of water over smooth stones, the smell of river mud and distant flowers. The stars above Egypt are vast and white and ancient, the same stars that the pyramid builders looked up at, the same stars that Hatshepsut navigated by on her journey to Punt, the same stars that Tutankhamun never grew old enough to see replaced. They are above you now, the same ones, still in their courses, still keeping their ancient watch. Egypt sleeps tonight. The desert is silent and warm. The monuments stand in the moonlight, patient and permanent. The temples are quiet. The painted gods rest in their stone chambers. The mummies sleep in their linen wrappings. And the wheat fields along the Nile bend gently in the night wind. And somewhere, very deep and very still, the river moves on, as it always has, as it always will. You have been here tonight, walking through the oldest story ever told. And now the story is complete. The scroll is rolled carefully closed. The candle beside the ancient scribe burns very low. The flame grows small and soft, and the ancient world whispers its final words, the same words it has always whispered, to every sleeping child, to every weary traveler, to every human heart that has ever looked at the stars and wondered. Rest now. You are safe.
You are known. You are part of something very old and very beautiful. The stars above Egypt are the same stars above you tonight, and the ancient world sleeps as you sleep now.